time zone. My name is Alex Mejia. I am a division director at UNITAR, and I will have the pleasure of introducing the first speaker. To my right, my United Nations Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Nikhil Seth, to start the proceedings and this inaugural session. Mr. Seth.
Thank you, Alex, and good afternoon to all of you. This is the 8th such event, and I've been present in 7 of them. And I must say, by the number of people in the room, and the people joining online are in the ratio of 1 person here to 3 person online. So I must say, it's gathering strength. Because I was wanting to comment on something which we were discussing on this table. And one of the ambassadors on the table was saying, what really comes out of these dialogues? What is it that we hope to achieve? And of course, we are fighting a very long legacy of history, where interfaith dialogue, a lot of people do come, say their things and go away. But how do we make that a part of our daily lives, where tolerance and respect for religions, respect for human dignity becomes the way we live? That has been a challenge. And I think the more people we get in the conversation, as we are through this dialogue today, I think the greater we will have the respect that each one of us deserves, regardless of our faith, our gender, our color, our ethnicity. And that's what we hope to promote through dialogues such as this. Well, as the Executive Director of UNITAR, it's a real special pleasure for me to see all of you here and welcome you and thank my own team and the Ambassador of Jordan, who put so much effort, and he has been almost as regular as I have, but he's been here for a shorter while. But thank you so much, Ambassador, for the energy you bring to this dialogue. This is, of course, in conformity with the UN General Assembly resolution for the Interfaith Week, and this is our small contribution to the Interfaith Week. And I also wanted to start really by expressing my solidarity with the delegation of Turkey and Syria for the suffering that they are facing in the most tragic of natural disasters, with such a large footprint and so many thousand counted as dead and injured. And I think double that number probably who have not been counted yet as dead and injured. So from all our side, our sympathy to those who are bereaved and the loss and suffering that this terrible accident is causing. We're living in a very churned up world where unprecedented levels of conflict and violence, crisis in public health, poverty and hunger, inequalities and severe environmental degradation under the overall shadow of accelerating climate change calls on us to take urgent action. It is high time we drown our differences, the kind of differences we try to address in interfaith dialogues, for example, and worry about the threat of our existence as a species. Faith, multilateralism, and public policy are the crucial ingredients for effective engagement to save us from ourselves. Because most of the crises we see today are self-inflicted wounds, and we must find ways to heal these terrible wounds. The motto of the 10th Assembly of Religions for Peace in 2019 was caring for our common future. And this remains an imperative for humankind. In these dialogues, it's not enough just to urge change in institutions, change in mechanisms and entities, to focus more, to work harder, to do better. We need to fundamentally transform our sources of knowledge, our mindset, our societies, our economies, our finance. We need a deep and fundamental shift to mitigate the impact of an overactive fault line. And hatred driven by religion remains a terrible fault line. The nexus between faith, human rights, diplomacy, and multilateralism of course, precedes the United Nations by thousands of years. Religious teachings have laid the foundation of the sanctity of human dignity and value, including for society's most vulnerable people, centuries before the modern human rights law was conceived. In the worlds of public policy and international relations, faith and religion have played different roles at different times. As we aim to seek multilateral solutions to global issues, we must further the multi-religious means to promote sustainable peace and prosperity. Inspiring the faith-based organizations to take meaningful action on so many of our global challenges calls for a new kind of partnership between them and multilateral institutions. Public policy today has to include faith-based organizations at the decision-making table. The UN has to engage faith-based organizations in all aspects of its work, relating to advocacy, to analysis, to policy and operational activities. After all, what does the UN do? We do these four kinds of things: advocacy, analysis, policy, and operational activities. And each one of these activities, is very important that we give a central and prominent role to faith-based organizations. Just as the modern world's issues are global in scale and transgenerational, so are the solutions that dialogue between faiths may achieve. When the Secretary General was appointed, he stressed the role of religious actors in supporting peace and building bridges between people. I place a special emphasis on the term bridge building that the UN Secretary General often uses. One of the very famous UN Secretary Generals, Dag Hammarskjöld, once compared his role to that of a secular pope, possibly following his conversations with His Holiness Pope Pius XII, who referred to Mr. Hammarskjöld as his lay counterpart. The late Kofi Annan was also commended in a General Assembly memorial as a dedicated defender of human rights, the epitome of soft power, and well deserving of the sobriquet of the secular pope. In 2012, Antonio Guterres, who was then served as the High Commissioner for Refugees, said that the UNHCR is not a faith-based organization. Yet, he said, when I came here, I soon discovered in its work exactly the same principles that are enshrined in my own beliefs. And I also realized that the values of caring for those in need was equally shared by all major religions. We can see examples of all this in major religions, be it the concept of critical tolerance in Buddhism, the emphasis of tolerance and nonviolence in Hinduism, the teachings of Jesus Christ of loving one's enemy, or the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad about the value of saving the lives of others. The philosophical foundations of all the major faiths, despite their differences, guide their adherents to be responsible towards their environment and their neighbors. Buddhism teaches that all things are non-self, that is, mutually existing. All existence is supported by everything outside of itself. The implications of this maxim has on the responsibility and duty to act in a humanitarian and hospitable way is clear. Similarly, the Abrahamic religions teach that all mankind was created in the image of God. The responsibility of individuals, therefore, before their fellow neighbors is not just one of many rules, but in fact a mandate from God. His Holiness Pope Francis summarizes this perfectly in the Fratelli Tutti encyclical with the following saying: the different religions, based on their respect for each human person as a creature, called to be a child of God, contribute significantly to building fraternity and defending justice in society. Most scholars and analysts agree that faith, whether on the individual or organizational level, has crucial impacts on the peace process. Faith plays an important role both before a conflict, through effective preventive engagement, and during and after a conflict, through effective peace building and peacemaking implementation. This is achieved inter alia through the centrality of unconditional forgiveness and reconciliation, which most religions preach and believe in. Such a faith-based diplomacy is a reconciliation-oriented peace-building process which aims not only to eliminate conflict, but also to restore a healthy and respectful environment. Indeed, we should elevate the role of faith in solving conflicts rather than placing the blame of faith on causing conflicts. Empirical studies often point to faith-based organizations playing a crucial role in the resolution of conflict. Most constitutions, and many of them are from countries which have constitutions of this nature, separate the church and the state. However, we must stress that the separation of church from state does not mean that the state is ignorant of the church, the mosque, the synagogue, the pagoda, and the temple as one of the bases of implementing public policy. Effective policy making must take both the grievances and the solution building abilities of religious individuals and organizations. Religion also provides a complementary approach to tackling nations' problems that governments rarely focus on. The condemnation of greed and excess, for example, are prime examples of the difficulties in combating poverty and unequal access to resources, while the transnational and trans-ethnic authority of different religions plays an important role in addressing inter-ethnic violence and crime. Let me end by saying that if all the facets of the world we inhabit, particularly all of us who inhabit this wonderful multilateral world, if all of us were imbued by faiths, multilateralism and public policy would be so much richer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Seth, for your inaugural remarks. For the same purpose, it is my great pleasure now to invite His Excellency Ambassador Walid Khalid Obeidat, the permanent representative of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan to the United Nations in Geneva, to take the floor. Excellency.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. And since I'm going to take the floor later on, I'm going to be brief in this presentation. This year marks the 13th anniversary of the UN Resolution number 655, entitled World Interfaith Harmony Week, in which the UN General Assembly proclaimed the first week of February as the World Interfaith Harmony Week between all religions, faiths, and beliefs. The initiative was based on the two great commandments of love of God and love of thy neighbor, found at the heart of the three monotheistic faiths, and was proposed to the GA by His Majesty King Abdullah II of Jordan, and was unanimously adopted by the UN on 20th October 2010. And indeed, in our world that is becoming smaller by the day, we all have become neighbors, whose never-ending challenge remains putting the meaning of these good words into proper action. Today also marks the 8th anniversary of the launch of the Geneva Interfaith Dialogue that Jordan, the permanent mission of Jordan, proudly and jointly shared with UNITAR. And in this connection, I cannot but thank the Executive Director and my dear friend Alex for their efforts in this regard. I have tried to put few words as a presentation, but I couldn't find better than the following quote that, if you would allow me, quote it. It's taken from a speech of His Majesty that he has delivered earlier this month to the National Prayer Breakfast in DC. He started it as follows, and I'm quoting. I want to start by sharing with you an image that I myself treasure. In my country, there is a sprawling tree in the desert known as the Blessed Tree. Every time I fly over this magnificent tree, I'm struck by the harsh, dry land it thrives in, and I wonder how deep its roots must go, how wide they must spread to sustain its life. That image fills me with hope, because this is no ordinary tree. It is over 1,400 years old, and it is the tree under which, as a young man, the future Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, took shelter when his caravan stopped to rest. Under its leaves, he met a Byzantine monk who looked at him and prophesied that he would become the messenger of God. It is the earliest interfaith meeting between Muslim and Christians. Today, although we may not be standing under a tree, this interfaith gathering, including this one, fills me with hope, because just as the blessed tree stands out against the harsh desert, our faith stands in contrast to the darkness of our times. End of quote. We did not coordinate our speeches, but they go hand in hand towards a better future, and the role that faith plays in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. And again, thank you, Mr. Seth, for your very thoughtful remarks to inaugurate this event. We will move forward according to the agenda to panel 1, but not before I am given the privilege of introducing the topic. We have a presentation, a short presentation that I believe is ready. If you can help us, Iman or Daniel, you can put the presentation on. I have already mentioned my name. So, 2 panels, faith and multilateralism, to be followed after a short break by the second panel on faith and public policy. Many commonalities, certain specificities, but before we do that, allow me to simply recall that this event is organized under the auspices of United Nations General Assembly Resolution 65/5. You can see on the screen why is it that it remains relevant today after all these years. The resolution calls for recognizing the imperative need for dialogue amongst different faiths and religions to enhance mutual understanding, harmony, and cooperation among people. The United Nations General Assembly encourages all states to spread the message of interfaith harmony and goodwill in the world's churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, and other places of worship on a voluntary basis and according to their own religious traditions or convictions. That's the essence of it. And that's why this General Assembly resolution has been also, if I may say, Excellency, adopted by UNITAR to keep pushing, to keep remembering every year at the beginning of February. Our Assistant Secretary General believes that faith indeed is a great instrument of peace. And this is why we are here today. Next, please. Next. Let me remember our previous Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, in a phrase of his that still touches me very much. He said, as a secular organization, the United Nations has no common religion, but like all the major faiths, we too work on behalf of the disadvantaged and the vulnerable. That captures the whole, in my opinion. Next, please. In the next slide, you are going to see something that you know well, but for the benefit of the participants that are connected from very many places and that are listening to these deliberations, we simply want to portray the multilateral framework and the United Nations at the core of it as an instrument that is valuable for both multilateralism and faith. Now, as you can see on the screen, we went from 51 founding members in 1945 to 193 today. That also shows, is another aspect of inclusivity. All faiths are welcome. This is why the United Nations encourages this type of dialogues. The UN Charter, signed in San Francisco in June 45, clearly establishes that the organization is a center for humanizing the actions of nations in the attainment of these common ends. All humanity carries the same desire for peace, progress, inclusion, for the betterment of our neighbor. And you can read below that indeed we are here to foster international cooperation, this being part of that. Next, please. In the next slide, you will also see that faith at the United Nations remain important. If you read the UN Charter, there are reflections indeed, motivations, influences for several faiths when it was drafted in 1945 and before. But it's important that I read what is on the screen. Today, hundreds of faith-based organizations or FBOs have the right to engage with the UN via ECOSOC registration and accreditation. As long as they ostensibly and consistently conform to UN values and protocols, then they are able to act at the UN as credible interlocutors on various moral and ethical issues, including international development, the fight against poverty, human rights, or migration. with both capacity and opportunity to take part in various kinds of discussions and debates linked to global policy formulation and execution. At the bottom, you can see that there are three, amongst many, issues that we believe the faith-based organizations do well. First, they have a well-documented increase in significance and a focus on religion and international relations that perhaps before was ignored. Number two, there is an increased international focus on values, norms, and behavior following the end of the Cold War and contemporaneous deepening and expansion of globalization. And finally, we recognize that many faith-based organizations have concern with various aspects of human rights at the United Nations. They do carry a voice, and they are welcome here. Next, please. In this slide, we simply wanted to remember a great mentor of ours. Mr. Seth actually worked for the late Kofi Annan, who retired to Geneva and passed away rather recently, but left a humongous legacy amongst us. He said once, often we mistake stability in terms of security and economic activity to mean a country is doing well. We forget the third and most important pillar, rule of law and respect for human rights. When we have this type of dialogue, we have to go back to those premises. And I understand that we do have a short video of our late Secretary General that says it all in two parts. If you have it ready, please go forward.
We live in a world where we are confronted with many challenges, from climate change, terrorism, inequality, and a whole series of issues. And none of these problems can be resolved by any one country, however powerful and however confident that country or the leader is. We need to work across national borders to resolve these issues in a sustainable manner. And so we were very happy to discuss some of these issues with the Secretary General, from Syria to the African crisis, to the Iran nuclear issue and the Korean crisis. And we believe that as difficult as the world is today, and as divisive as it's proven to be in certain areas, we really need to make every effort to support multilateralism and to sustain cooperation.
Thank you. He continues on something that I beg for your patience so we can hear. It's important that we do so, especially for the audience that is connected virtually, that is not necessarily a connoisseur or part of our ecosystem. Before we go to that second part, I wanted to mention that this was a conference on the value of multilateralism. And he was a great believer, as you know, someone that we greatly admire still today, and that we think is valuable to remember. Why is it that multilateralism remains viable, and why is it that faith is also part of the dialogue? Go to the second part, please, Iman. Thank you.
The other thing I would want to say is I'm very happy to see people from different aspects of different parts of society getting into government. There has always been a sense that public servants are not as efficient as private sector people, not as efficient as businessmen. I think that is also something that we need to be careful about and debunk. I have seen men and women move from the private sector to the public sector and vice versa. From my experience, a private sector person moving to the political sector often finds it much more difficult than the other way around. Why is it more difficult? It's more difficult because they don't have the managerial autonomy, the focused objective of maximizing profits. And you realize each time you have to take a decision, you consult, you need consensus. Frustration level goes up. This is waste of time. Why do I have to talk to everybody and his cousin? before I take a decision. But that is the nature of public life, and that is the nature of diplomacy. I know that people sometimes believe the UN talks a lot, and it's jaw, and no action. But I often say that when you bring that many countries together, you cannot impose a decision on them. You will need to have serious discussion. And besides, we accept that if a scientist is doing an experiment and starts with a hypothesis and goes through 100 experiments, but only one succeeds, he's brilliant. We don't say the 99 times was a waste. The same goes for us. We do lots of talking, but periodically we come up with something. And that is our creative redundancy, the talking. So you have to be patient with us. I think I will pause here.
Indeed, multilateralism indeed takes time to produce things, but it does produce things and relevant things, and faith should be indeed something that will link with multilateralism and this global dialogue that ensues in places like this very own Palais des Nations. So thank you for allowing us to remember a man of wisdom that had relevant things to say, valid still today. And with that, I would like to now go to the first panel, introducing the first speaker, which is a great privilege. Next indeed, the slide. Yes, next. Thank you. It's a great privilege for us to have Her Excellency Ambassador Hind Abdelrahman Al Mukhtar, the permanent representative of the State of Qatar, taking the floor. Excellency, welcome.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, ladies and excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum, which is mean peace upon you. In the beginning, I would like to thank both UNITAR and Jordanian mission for giving us this opportunity to be part of this dialogue, and wishing you all to benefit from this dialogue. And more importantly, I really wish from my heart that by ending this session, that we will be playing very active and effective role in promoting understanding the harmony and respect of our faith and different religions. In the beginning, let me start also by stressing the fact that we, as individuals, through upholding faith, morals, and respect of different religions, we live together in harmony. We live together by respecting each other, which indeed will pave our way to not better understanding, but also to lay the foundation for cooperation, long-standing and respected cooperation. And probably our passion, our desire to learn from each other, our willingness to understand each other, that brought us to this room today, in order so that we move forward such kind of a productive dialogue, specifically when it comes to multilateralism. With all appreciation and thanks a lot for the multilateralism within the UN and the great role played by the UN and its different bodies. And it is really very hard, it is hardly possible to deny the essential role played by by faith and religion, and how it has been playing a very significant role in shaping contemporary principles and values of the basic human rights and international human rights agreements. For example, the concept of inherent display of all human rights family is deeply rooted, not only in our religions, not only in philosophical ideas, but also in many of the agreements, as been explained by my colleague. It is rooted dramatically in the basic human rights of the United Nations. On the other hand, the recent crisis of the COVID-19 and non-stop devastating human climate changes have made it very clear that long-term solution, as my colleagues been saying, it can be only addressed through a collaborative structure at multiple levels. And to achieve this aim or this end, diplomacy and multilateralism, whether regional, global, national, or global, are indispensable and necessary when it comes to faith and religion. Unfortunately, today, our world is rife with religion, tension, and sadly, mistrust, dislike, and hatred. Such religious tension can easily erupt into communal violence. It can also facilitate demonizing of the other, which in turn dispose public opinion to support war against each other. The number of violence being taken towards attacking towards mosques, churches, and many other holy religious institutions, even holy figures and gatherings, hate speeches and acts we witness in the last few years is unsettling. Thus, misuse or abuse of faith and religion can thus be a cause of world tension, as we've been saying many times. I would like, before I go deeply in the multilateralism and faith, just to share with you what my country has been doing in this regard since 2003, where we started by Qatar National Vision, which straightforward and very clearly stated the respect of culture, the respect of faith, and the respect of religion when it comes to basic human rights. Today, there are more than 100 nationalities living in Qatar together in peace with different cultural background, with different religion and different faith and beliefs. But practically, Qatar in 2007 established an institution which is called Doha International Center for Interfaith Dialogue. And since then, it's been holding and hosting an annual conference at some point in cooperation with the United Nations that discuss on a continuous basis, not only with religious figures, but also with activists, the civil societies, stakeholders, locally, regionally, and globally. How do we have to promote interfaith respect and dialogue? It also had conducted many training courses to develop and capacity building for the young people, the youth, and the women, civil societies, the stakeholders, activists, and so on, to encourage them about respect. And in line with the Geneva Interfaith Week, tomorrow, 11th of February, the Doha Center will host a Global Youth Interfaith Intellectual Forum, Qatar 23, which is hosting plus 85 youth from different regions from the world, from different backgrounds in terms of faith and religion, to discuss how, as a youth, can be an essential part in promoting cultural and faith and inter-religion dialogue and respect. Also, Qatar University, which is the leading university of Qatar, they took many initiatives when it comes to intercultural and interfaith respect and dialogue. But most importantly, they have one master program which is specialized in respecting religious and dialogue between civilization, which has been there since a while. And it has many international students who are taking this program. Even here in Geneva, Qatar also has been a strong supporter to the Human Rights Resolution 1618, and it's been in touch and collaboration and with many UN stakeholders in hosting interfaith dialogue. Now, Excellencies, as human beings, we have been created by God Almighty, diversified in our shapes, color, languages, beliefs, and desire. But we are all born with one human rights, and when it comes to respect of our faith, respect of our culture, respect of our color, ethnicity, whatever. Now, to preserve this right and dignity, we need to rebuild trust in the world. And we've been listening to many arguments about how there is an issue of mistrust in the world, whether it was under the multilateralism or governments or whatever. And more significantly, we need to rebuild the trust in the multilateralism, its power in making peace and continuous dialogue based on mutual respect for our diversity, a dialogue that can vaccinate our societies against virus of intolerance, discrimination, and extremism. Now, despite, and thank you very much for mentioning the numerous United Nations multilateral treaties, declarations, long-standing resolutions, and many other instruments that promote the right of person belonging to national, ethnic, or religious minorities, yet some questions are still raised. And let me share with you now some of the questions that I've been noticed over the last few months since I joined Geneva, but also I've read it somewhere in some of the documents of the meetings, of some of the UN papers, and so on. Number one is the ambiguity of a human rights, laws, and resolution when it comes to faith and religion. And the main question that comes within this argument is like for example, to what extent paragraph or article number 5 of Vienna Declaration, which states and mention the respect of culture is being implemented when it comes to discussing any political issues that intervene or violate a human basic right of respecting those culture, including, of course, the controversial terminologies and concepts being used within the United Nations debates. Now, in addition, there are some few facts also being questions within multilateralism. And again, this is not my personal criticism as much as I would just like to share it with you. Now, number one, which is basically also dominated being last time recently, is the politicization and the double standards, and to what extent it's used when we are talking or debating about faith, which is in reality, it shouldn't never be. And this is because multilateralism should not interfere within faith and religion. And the other one is that faith and religions cannot be considered as actors under international law. Thus, the question that raises itself here is to what extent faith and religion are used effectively as part of the solution of multilateralism in building peace and keeping such respect. Now, giving the importance of the global context in terms of a freedom of religion or belief, unfortunately, I feel obliged to express disappointment. The recent public burning actually, of the Holy Quran in some Western countries is another example of the flawed situation. Those who committed this deeply heinous act verily know that respect for the Quran is as a holy book, as well as many other religions and faith, is an important element for religions, faith, and Islam. And what raises particular concerns is that this act was repeated in the following 2 days with the approval of their governments, which in turn, within the Islamic region, is turned like into public opinion of the hatred of Islamophobia and so on. Now, this blatant manifestation of disrespect of religion, hatred could lead to social disharmony and result in further of a violation of a human rights, and therefore would warrant more attention and entails the need to work together at all levels to counter probably Islamophobia in particular, but also the respect of other religions and eliminating intolerance of all other, eliminating intolerance in all its forms. Now, to conclude, we really need to raise awareness. We really appreciate what is being done within the multilateralism and to some extent what is being doing within some governments. But we really need to work together in terms of respecting, promoting understanding of each other and respecting of each other when it comes to our background, cultural background, respect of our religion, respect of our faith. Not only in the multilateralism, but more significantly at the government levels and the media, specifically the social media, parliamentarians' actions. We need also more of engagement of the stakeholders within any society and community. At such very critical time, as being mentioned also by my colleague, we need to unite together. We need to unite together not because we need to understand each other, but we need to unite together because we are really witnessing an increased hate speeches and increased discrimination. We need to unite together because we need to live in peace together. We are not here to fight each other. We are not here to hate each other, but to unite together so that we can, so that we can move forward peacefully. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Excellency. Thank you very much indeed. We will continue the proceedings now. It is my great pleasure to invite Her Excellency Ambassador Marie-Thérèse Pictet-Adam, the Permanent Observer of the Sovereign Order of Malta, to take the floor. Excellency, welcome.
Mr. Assistant Secretary General, Excellencies, Mr. Executive Director, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me first to express my gratitude to His Excellency Ambassador Walid Khalid Obat and Assistant Secretary General Nikhil Sif for this kind invitation to participate in the 8th Annual Geneva Interfaith Dialogue organized by UNITA and the Permanent Mission of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. The Sovereign Order of Malta is proud to have co-sponsored and participated in this important event since the very beginning. As a lay religious order of the Catholic Church, subject sui generis of international law and a humanitarian institution, the Order of Malta occupies a special position within the community of nations. Its increasing involvement during recent years in multilateral diplomacy is closely linked to its spiritual and humanitarian mission, Tuitio Fidei et Obsequium Pauperum, protection of the faith and service to the sick and the poor. Through its humanitarian diplomacy, the Order of Malta engages in multilateralism on different levels. It aims at fully recognizing the diversity and the equal value of all partners so as to uphold human dignity and care for those in need. Through its national associations and its worldwide relief agency, Malteser International, it provides assistance in 120 countries. Its diversified programs are run independently or in partnership with governments, international and local agencies. Malteser International operates in areas affected by natural disasters, conflicts, and massive displacement. It focuses on delivering emergency relief, medical and social assistance, humanitarian supplies, shelter, food, and clean water. At the same time, it implements rehabilitation, reconstruction, and disaster risk reduction measures. For example, on Monday, Malteser International immediately responded to the devastating earthquakes in Turkey and Syria through its teams on the ground who have been caring for refugees since 2012, as well as by sending an emergency response team to the border region where it is operating presently. The objectives of the Order's humanitarian multilateralism are to foster the exchange of information and best practices while contributing and sharing its expertise in the following fields: global displacement, humanitarian assistance, global health, human rights, social justice, and integration. The principal task of the Order of Malta's multilateral diplomacy is to develop and strengthen its relations, promote cooperation, and forge partnerships with the United Nations, other international organizations, and faith-based institutions to inform the community of nations on its actions worldwide, as well as to promote its ideals, which are closely linked to the United Nations Charter's principles and the Sustainable Development Goals. In this spirit, we attended last year the International Ministerial Conference on Freedom of Religion in London, in our capacity as observer to the International Freedom of Religion or Belief Alliance. At present, we are organizing a high-level panel to be hosted by our Grand Chancellor and Minister for Foreign Affairs at the forthcoming Munich Security Conference, entitled, and I quote, "Piecing It Together, Religion, Diplomacy and Conflict," unquote. We are also contributing to the Parliamentary Conference on Interfaith Dialogue, organized by the Interparliamentary Union, to be held in Marrakesh, Morocco this June. And the distinguished ambassador of Qatar has just mentioned the importance of involving parliamentarians in all these efforts. Indeed, multilateralism and faith are complementary in the sense that they have common values and share the aims for peace, protection of human dignity and diversity in all its forms, as mentioned earlier on by the Assistant Secretary General. Mutual respect and a balance between religion and state are necessary to build inclusive societies that observe religious beliefs and cultural identities which are inextricably connected. This reflects the 84% of the world's population that identifies itself with a faith or belief. Thus, religion has become a central topic on today's international policy agenda. Governments need to take into account the return of religion to public life and its growing importance on the multilateral stage. In parallel, we are witnessing the gaining of strength and visibility of the role of religious institutions and faith-based organizations in this global architecture. It is generally acknowledged that religious traditions can have a strong impact on foreign affairs, on peace building, and other important measures. Therefore, decision makers need to recognize religion's contribution to conflict prevention and peace building. Today, the world faces unprecedented crises which call for truly universal approach and the development of global strategies to contain them. In addition to man-made and natural disasters, a number of widespread trends such as demographic growth, increasing urbanization, poverty, food insecurity, water scarcity, and climate change trigger major population movements, leading to new crisis situations. In this regard, allow me to refer to the upcoming United Nations Water Conference to be held next month in New York. Our mission has been part of the Geneva Group of Friends on Water and Peace, created in line with the United Nations Water Action Decade, preparing for this event. At present, our mission in New York is co-organizing two side events on water, sanitation and hygiene for this important conference. I have just returned from a field trip to northern Kenya, where I witnessed the terrible drought affecting the area, resulting in the loss of livelihood afflicting the local populations, which in turn has brought hunger, lack of water, and extreme poverty upon them. This was an extraordinarily impressive visit, and I shall never forget the populations I met there, who have nothing left, not even a perspective in their lives. Furthermore, development issues, health emergencies, terrorism, asymmetric threats, organized crime, large-scale human trafficking, radicalism, and cybersecurity can only be addressed successfully by all actors working together in a spirit of solidarity, cooperation, and burden sharing. Climate change is presently considered the most overwhelming long-term challenge, requiring unprecedented efforts by all parties. It has become a top priority on the multilateral agenda that is being addressed by concerted action for universal application. Humanitarian law is an essential element to limit the devastating effects of armed conflicts and ensure protection of innocent civilians and forcibly displaced persons. The Order of Malta is ready to support global efforts to further develop methods adapted to modern crisis situations so as to alleviate physical, moral, and spiritual sufferings and reduce the risk of conflict. As we know, and we have already heard, no country has enough influence to pursue such ambitious aims alone. Furthermore, we need to multiply our endeavors with regard to promoting respect and achieving the worldwide fulfillment of human rights, thereby advocating for the rights of the most vulnerable. The renewal of multilateral cooperation in the 21st century requires new mechanisms to strengthen its diversity and ensure that forward-looking players are part of an inclusive global approach. Strategic reforms within the United Nations and its agencies need to be pursued and adequate funding guaranteed by member states and the private sector. This entails a shift in the United Nations organizational culture and mentalities at all levels, as requested by the Secretary General. At the traditional New Year's audience to the diplomatic corps, His Excellency Fra John Dunlap, Lieutenant of the Grand Master of the Sovereign Order of Malta, said, and I quote, "We cannot help but note the increasing role that religion is taking in international relations and the importance that the promotion and protection of freedom of religion or belief is taking on at both bilateral and multilateral levels. The Order of Malta is present as a member or as an observer in international fora, in particular at the United Nations in New York, Geneva, and Vienna, contributing its values, experience, ideas, and proposals, unquote. Finally, through its engagement in the strengthening of multilateralism, the Sovereign Order of Malta aims at consolidating the protection of the human rights of all and promoting human dignity, freedom of religion, interreligious dialogue, and as well as the role of faith-based institutions. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Excellency, for your intervention. We'll continue with the proceedings. And now it's my great pleasure to invite Her Excellency Ambassador Nassima Bagli, the permanent observer of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, to take the floor. Welcome, Excellency.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank first the Permanent Mission of Jordan and UNITAR for organizing this 8th Geneva Interfaith Dialogue under the theme Faith and Multilateralism in accordance with UNGA Resolution 65/5. At a time where we are advocating for a stronger multilateralism because of the many challenges the world is facing, the theme chosen for this session is very appropriate. The world is indeed confronting a convergence of crises that require the contribution of all of us, and faith has certainly a role to play in this endeavor. We can say that faith and multilateralism are intrinsically linked because all religions appeal to feelings of compassion and empathy with others and advocate for peaceful coexistence between peoples and nations. Faith can thus be a very good vector of multilateralism in all fields. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, for its part, is an intergovernmental political organization that is guided by Islamic values of moderation, tolerance, and solidarity. It strives to promote interstate relations and to ensure global peace, security, and harmony. It is expanding its activities to accompany its member states in their development efforts and is also engaged in bringing its contribution to respond to the many challenges the world is facing. The organization is involved in the settlement of crises and conflicts in many regions of the world. It is doing so through promoting dialogue, including Interfaith One. The OIC has played such roles notably in the southern Philippines, southern Thailand, the Central African Republic, Sudan, Chad, and Afghanistan. Regarding Afghanistan, a special envoy has been appointed to reach out to the de facto authorities and discuss with them the ways and means to promote an inclusive and sustainable peace in the country. As to the decision of these authorities to ban girls from schools and universities, the OIC has condemned this move, arguing that women's right to education is not just a full-fledged right, but is also an essential component for development and peace. The OIC has sent a delegation of ulama, scholars, to Afghanistan to highlight the critical importance of girls' and women education. A second delegation will be dispatched shortly. Referring to Myanmar, where the Rohingya community has been forced to flee its home country because of the violence and discriminations it was subjected to, the government of the Gambia, on behalf of the OIC, has lodged a file at the International Court of Justice on the application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. In the humanitarian field, and as many OIC countries are countries of origin and destination of refugees, the OIC has stepped up its humanitarian capacities. It has strengthened its regional office in Niamey, which covers the Sahel region, as well as its offices in Mogadishu and Kabul to bring assistance to refugees and IDPs. The UNHCR and the Islamic Development Bank have launched in 2022 the Global Fund for Refugees, which provides an innovative resource mobilization tool for the benefit of refugees and host communities. In the field of development, the OIC has adopted the Programme of Action 2025, which is in line with the SDGs and is working on a follow-up program. Poverty alleviation and education are key priorities. In the health sector, the Islamic Advisory Group held a meeting last December on the theme Partnering for Change, leveraging faith to promote public health, with the vision of promoting health and well-being through Islamic teachings. The Islamic Advisory Group, in collaboration with some partners, including ulama, national representatives, and WHO, deals with issues related to immunization programs, including polio eradication. On the prevention of violent extremism, the OIC has put in place a program called Sawt al-Hikmah, the Voice of Wisdom, which utilizes conventional and social media to deconstruct the extremist discourse and promote the real nature of Islam, which is the religion of peace and tolerance. Regarding human rights, the OIC is bringing its contribution to the international architecture of human rights. It has adopted in 2021 the revised version of the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights, which is aligned with international standards and Islamic values. While referring to the UN Charter and the International Bill of Human Rights, the preamble of the Cairo Declaration underlines member states' willingness to contribute to the efforts of mankind to assert human rights and affirms their freedom and right to a dignified life in accordance with Islamic values. A Women Development Organization has been created in 2021, which objectives are to develop programs and activities aimed at empowering women in OIC countries. An independent permanent human rights commission has been established in 2011, which is working as an advisory body for the advancement of human rights and fundamental freedoms and promoting inter-civilizational dialogue. While dealing with human rights issues, I would like to mention the phenomenon of Islamophobia that is causing a lot of harm to Muslim people in many parts of the world in terms of discrimination and prejudice. The OIC has strongly condemned the desecration of the Holy Quran in some European countries. In accordance with UNGA Resolution 26/254, proclaiming 15 March the International Day on Combating Islamophobia, the OIC encourages countries to mark that day and take measures to fight against this scourge. The distinguished ambassador of Qatar mentioned the HRC Resolution 1618, which should be fully implemented. In conclusion, I would like to say that OIC has developed mechanisms and programs to bring its contribution to the international efforts aimed at promoting peace, development, and human rights. Faith touches on the most profound feelings of people and is an extraordinary leverage to reach out to people and build bridges. Guided by international standards and Islamic values, the OIC is contributing to multilateralism in close cooperation with the UN. The two organizations hold biannual meetings to review the progress of their cooperation in all fields. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. Indeed, we will conclude this panel with the last presenter. So it is my great pleasure to offer the floor to Reverend Monsignor John David Putzer, the Deputy Head of the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See to the United Nations in Geneva. Excellency.
Dear friends, at the outset, allow me to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to Mr. Nikhil Seth, the UN Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director of UNITAR, and to His Excellency Walid Khalid Obiedat, the Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of Jordan to the United Nations in Geneva, as well as to Mr. Alex Mejia for organizing this annual Interfaith Dialogue, and to all of the participants, panelists, and guests here today. It is an honor and a privilege for me to join you at this 8th gathering of people of diverse faith traditions who share a common interest and conviction that through sincere dialogue, the richness of our beliefs might have a positive impact on the world in which we live. Each of us knows from personal experience the value and importance of religion in our lives. This annual conference allows us to share that which is most important to us in a spirit of trust and fraternity, so that we might learn from one another, help one another, and grow together in mutual respect. In a particular way, I believe the theme that was chosen for this panel discussion is both timely and important: faith and multilateralism. Indeed, our world is currently facing intersecting crises, including food insecurity, massive migration flows, health emergencies, numerous protracted conflicts like the ongoing war in Ukraine, as well as climate change and natural disasters. In this last regard, my thoughts and prayers go to the victims of the terrible earthquake that took place this past Monday in Syria and Turkey. My sincerest condolences to all those affected by this tragedy. These global crises test the limits of the multilateral system and have clearly demonstrated that we cannot be saved alone and by ourselves. The greatest challenges of our time are all global. Unfortunately, while what is needed is a renewal of collaboration and cooperation to address these challenges, all too frequently, the discussions within the international organizations and UN system are hijacked by political and national interests, reciprocal vetoes, accusations, manipulation, and a lack of political will. As such, rather than seeking consensus through authentic dialogue, the operations of these institutions are blocked by increasing polarization amongst its members. This is why Pope Francis has called for a renewal of the multilateral system. Earlier this year, in his annual address to the members of the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See, the Pope said, I quote, "The current conflict in Ukraine has made all the more evident the crisis that has long affected the multilateral system, which needs a profound rethinking if it is to respond adequately to the challenges of our time. This demands a reform of the bodies that allow it to function effectively, so that they can be truly representative of the needs and sensitivities of all peoples, and avoid procedures that give greater weight to some to the detriment of others. It is not a matter of creating coalitions, but of providing opportunities for everyone to be partners in dialogue." End quote. Indeed, it is clear that the response of the multilateral system to the challenges we face today have been incomplete, untimely, and insufficient. From inadequate responses to providing vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics during global health emergencies, to the lack of serious commitments regarding the reduction of greenhouse emissions, to the lagging commitment to finding solutions to address ongoing future arms races, it is always the people in the most vulnerable situations that bear the brunt of these inadequacies. How can we adequately address this crisis of multilateralism? What would render our efforts more effective in responding to the needs of our day? Dear friends, it is here where I believe faith can have a tremendous impact. Religious values are human values, and where faith traditions witness in an authentic fashion to their beliefs and principles, they can play an important and complementary role in addressing the deficiencies of the multilateral system. As Pope Francis noted in the 7th Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions, which took place in Kazakhstan this past September, I quote, "Religion is not a problem, but part of the solution for a more harmonious life in society. The pursuit of transcendence and the sacred value of fraternity can inspire and illumine the decisions that need to be made amid the geopolitical, social, economic, ecological, but fundamentally spiritual crises that many modern institutions, including democracies, are presently experiencing, to the detriment of security and concord among peoples. We need religion in order to respond to the thirst for world peace and the thirst for the infinite that dwells in the heart of each man and woman." End quote. An excellent example of how religious traditions can have a positive impact on the world of the multilateral system can be seen in the document on human fraternity, jointly signed by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar in Abu Dhabi on 4th February 2019. Amongst other things, The document reiterates the firm conviction that authentic teachings of religions invite us to remain rooted in the values of peace, to defend the values of mutual understanding, human fraternity, and harmonious coexistence, to reestablish wisdom, justice, and love, and to reawaken religious awareness among young people so that future generations may be protected from the realm of materialistic thinking and from dangerous policies of unbridled greed and indifference that are based on the law of force and not on the force of law. In this regard, in addition to the UNGA Resolution 65/5, by which this first week of February is dedicated to interfaith dialogue, the UN General Assembly also on the 21 December 2020 adopted a resolution which, inspired by the above-mentioned document on human fraternity, establishes 4 February as the International Day of Human Fraternity, inviting all member states and other relevant organizations and stakeholders to observe this day by promoting peace, tolerance, inclusion, understanding, and solidarity. It is not an accident that these two celebrations go hand in hand: interfaith dialogue and human fraternity. These annual Geneva Interfaith Dialogues are another wonderful example of how, through dialogue, reflection, and mutual understanding, the deep riches of the various faith traditions can be promoted for the good of the international community. Dear friends, in conclusion, allow me to express the desire of Pope Francis with which he closed the above-mentioned annual address to the members of the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See. How wonderful it would be if just once we were to gather simply to thank the Lord Almighty for his constant blessings, without having to list all the tragic events plaguing our world. If I may quote once more the words of John the 23rd, we nonetheless remain hopeful that, by establishing contact with one another and by a policy of negotiation, nations will come to a better recognition of the natural ties that bind them together as men and women. We are hopeful, too, that they will come to a fairer realization of one of the cardinal duties deriving from our common nature, namely that love, not fear, must dominate the relationships between individuals and between nations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks to you, Monsignor, for your words. We will continue to the second panel, but not before inviting you to a small recess, literally a couple of minutes, because we will rearrange this table, and also knowing that there are some coffee, croissants, coffee and tea. So we will go straight to the second panel after thanking the speakers of the first panel and rearranging the presidium, the main table. Thank you very much. In that sense, thank you, Mr. Seth. In that sense, I would like to call Ambassador Obeidad to come to the main central chair. And also, His Excellencies, the Ambassador of Argentina, the Ambassador of Azerbaijan, and the Ambassador of the Bahamas, representing the United Nations Christian Association. So please join us here. First panel is concluded.
Thanks.
Thanks.
News Prince Hassan was received in You did good, good. Yes, very successful visit. We're very happy. He's an old friend in Malta. Yes, yes.
Has carried on his shoulder. Transporting and bringing them to the international.
Yes. Yes. And he's still.
So far, so good.
So I was very pleased to see that because I remember
Move Argentina here.
several years ago for a big
Yeah,
conference.
thank you so much. So far, so good.
And I was very impressed. And so I'm glad that he's the contacts with the order of Malta continue.
Thank you for being here. Means a lot.
Sneak out for another meeting at 4:30.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. But you made it. You came. Thank you so much. Say hello to the boss.
Invitation.
Excellency.
Let's see.
Yes.
No, please. My dear. do in the international and multilateral arena? We postulate that the answer is yes. And to give you some ruminations on that, I would like to request my colleagues to put a short presentation that we have prepared on the screen so we can indeed begin. As an introduction for that, and while the presentation is on, I would like to tell you that our Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, 3 weeks ago or so, was in Davos participating at the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. And we are going to hear from him a few remarks. If that video is also ready, Iman, I will appreciate having that. So go to the next presentation, please. To the next slide. Yes. So what is it that public policy is? Is the previous one? Yeah, this one. There are many definitions of public policy, but if I can give you one, allow me to say that public policy can be generally defined as a system of laws, regulatory measures, courses of action, and funding priorities concerning a given topic promulgated by a governmental entity or its representatives. Next, please. Once we understand public policy, and of course, some of us from the United Nations do interact with public policy on a daily basis, we rarely find, even if we understand public policy, we rarely find this understanding, this synergy between faith and public policy. So allow me to read what is on the screen. Public policies affect the whole fabric of life because they are based on certain assumptions about human nature, the purpose of life, and a hierarchy of values. In a word, public policies are ultimately rooted in transcendent commitments and have fundamental spiritual consequences. Why do we mention spiritual consequences? Because we have to remember, we rarely talk about this at the United Nations, but it is a basic premise. We human beings are mind and body indeed, but also spirit. Excellency, this side. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So if I continue with this slide just to introduce the topic, allow me to mention that most of today's constitutions in our countries are based on religious precepts, and this is, of course, very much evident. At the same time, we should say that the political policy and legal decisions have spiritual consequences for the institutions of our civilization and for all of us on a personal basis. This is difficult to dispute, and we recognize it as being reality. Now, regardless of the changes we see in our constitutions and laws in the 21st century, the protection and the well-being of the citizen remain at the core of our nations. To so value the individual is not the result of scientific logic, we believe, but instead a derivative of faith. It is captured in a genre of specific policies which reflects clearly spiritual assumptions. So if there is a university of public policy, there are several public policies that touch on faith, and they must be discussed. Next, please. Here you see that at the essence of that public policy at the governmental level, at the essence of what we discuss here, amongst very many topics, there is one at the top of the list, and for us is human rights. This is reflected, of course, in the way the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development has been conceived. Mr. Seth, who co-led the process from the United Nations side with Amina Mohammed, who is today our Deputy Secretary General, has always told us that faith was part of this discussion to arrive to the SDGs. Have always told us that faith-based organizations were consulted when we created indeed this roadmap that then was adopted by 193 governments in September 2015. Next, please. So, if public policy enacts and protects human rights, which one of those SDGs that I just mentioned is most relevant, perhaps? And we postulate that amongst many, amongst those 17, SDG 16, Sustainable Development Goal number 16, is rather important. It calls for the promotion of peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Next, please. When you see under the goal 16, all of these targets that are on the screen, which of course I'm not going to bother you with, suffice to say that at the core of governments remain institutions that are to be protected, nurtured, and developed so they can do the job. They can protect human rights, they can fight against poverty, they can protect the individuals, particularly vulnerable populations. So SDG 16 is a reminder today that these linkages that I want to invite you to think about between public policy and faith are most relevant for the whole, particularly when we talk about human rights, particularly when we talk about peace and the role of governmental institutions. Next, please. I would like to invite you to hear with us a short part of a video from our Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, taken 3 weeks ago in Davos. But not before I read this quote of him that continues to inspire us at the United Nations. He said, I quote, "The best response is one that responds proportionally to immediate threats while at the same time protecting human rights and the rule of law." This captures the essence of what we do here. And with that, please allow us to see this small part of his intervention in Davos. Yes, go ahead.
Engagement on climate, trade, and technology to avoid the decoupling of economies and even the possibility of future confrontations. For the historians that might be listening, we must avoid a 21st century sequel of the so-called Thucydides trap. At the same time, and secondly, the North-South divide is deepening. I am not convinced, in my context, that the wealthier world and their leaders truly grasps the degree of frustration and even anger in the global South. Frustration and anger about the gross inequity of vaccine distribution in the recent past. Frustration and anger about the pandemic recovery, with support overwhelmingly concentrated in wealthier countries that could print money. And trillions were printed in the global north, and of course, developing countries could not print money because their currencies would go out the drain. Frustration and anger about a climate crisis that is crippling countries that contributed least to global heating, and the lack of the financial resources to respond to the challenge. And frustration and anger over a morally bankrupt financial system in which systemic inequalities are amplifying societal inequalities. A system that is still routinely denying debt relief and concessional funding to vulnerable middle-income countries that are in desperate need, because the rules are not made to allow it.
Thank you. These words of our Secretary General, as recent as 3 weeks ago, put this in perspective. And with that, I would like to invite you to join me in hosting panel 2 on faith and public policy, indeed, introducing again His Excellency Ambassador Walid Khalid Obeidat, the permanent representative of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, one of the co-organizers of the Interfaith Dialogue in Geneva, to take the floor. Excellency, welcome again. Now it's ready.
Thank you very much again, Alex. It's a real pleasure being again, to have the floor again. And as usual, I'll be short. When we talk about resolution, General Assembly Resolution 65.5, it came as a culmination of multiple steps that were taken by Jordan towards institutionalization's common effort at the international level. Jordan's first call to action was in 2004, when His Majesty King Abdullah II launched the Amman Message. It's a document clarifying the central tenets of Islam basically rejecting terrorism, extremism, and violence, and denouncing the practice of declaring other Muslims as apostates. If you look at it, it's a Muslim-Muslim kind of a document that underlines and paved the way for common efforts in an institutionalized manner at the international level, reflecting the proper tenets and carrying them on. And one of the basic outcome of it was a very clear fight by the Muslim communities and Muslim countries worldwide of Daesh, a group of thugs hijacking a religion and making of it and hiding behind it to commit their atrocities. In 2007, and under the patronage of His Majesty King Abdullah II, a Common Word initiative was launched. It is based, of course, on the two commandments of love of God and love of the neighbor, which lie at the heart of the three monotheistic faiths. In the Quran, in Al-Imran, verse 64, God said, "O people of the book," and that's Muslims, Jews, and Christians, "let us come to a common word, to common terms, that we will worship none but Allah, associate none with Him, nor take one another as lords instead of Him." It's a very clear call to submit to God and to submit to the values He instills in us, values that we translate part of them in our common documents that you have just cited. Yet the challenges that the world faces today are immense, from natural disasters, as we have witnessed lately in Turkey and Syria. Of course, our deepest condolences go to both countries and to their peoples. Our feelings and prayers are with them even at this time. To risk associated with climate change, the effects of which we have also witnessed in Pakistan, the flooding, to shifting geopolitical landscapes in Europe and elsewhere, to extreme ideologies seeping into religion, politics, the internet, to gloomy economic forecasts, to combating COVID. We still haven't forgotten it, and I was very heartened to hear of it at the earlier first session, because the challenges are still there for many, many countries, and more. Confrontation is crowding out cooperation. So this is the task, I believe, that diplomats, leaders, and hopefully next generations will address properly. All are creating new risks of instability and undermining critical global efforts to address those shared challenges. Yet the tenets of faith are lighting our path. Lately in Syria and Turkey, we are seeing, despite many handicaps, the mobilization of massive humanitarian global efforts by the WHO, by the UNHCR, by states bilaterally, by grouping of states. We have seen international mobilization as well present to address effects of the extreme and devastating floods in Pakistan. We are all working together to address challenges in Yemen and elsewhere as well. The list is a never-ending list, but the will is a strong one. And I believe here in Geneva, under the auspices of the various specialized agencies and programs, and with the will of every one of us here in this room and elsewhere, and through dialogue, we can make things a little bit more attainable. We have all mobilized in this regard disaster relief, search and rescue, economic aid, humanitarian planning, and Jordan has joined all other countries in providing what it can. The tenets of faith, if we are talking about harmony, are also guiding us when providing assistance to the needy. We have mentioned displacement of people and refugees also in the first session. And Jordan, in this regard, is stretching its effort to the maximum in providing what it can. The alarming increase in the number of displaced people seeking refuge all over the world cannot but be addressed until solutions are found. In implementation of loving thy neighbor, Jordan has throughout its history opened its borders to receive millions of refugees from neighboring countries, sharing with them whatever meager resources that we have, and have opened our schools, hospitals, and markets to them. More so, Jordan advocates the importance of international efforts in addressing their plight because the responsibility towards refugees is a shared international one. In this regard, Jordan has actively participated in what was then the Global Refugee Forum of 2019 and will be one of the 6 co-conveners of the Global Refugee Forum of 2023 in December this year. It's putting words into action, not only by receiving refugees, by opening our houses and hearts to them, but also by mobilizing international efforts in addressing their plight with a view to finding a suitable solution and meanwhile providing suitable assistance. We look forward, look forward with other co-conveners, France, Japan, Colombia, Niger, Uganda, and of course the UNHCR, to have a wide and successful participation. Christians and Muslims in Jordan have lived side by side for centuries. I may not be mentioning others because we are vast majority are Muslims and Christians. We and Jordan have been playing an outsized role in fostering dialogue and common understanding among the world's faith. Under Jordan's social mix, Christians and Muslims say, and they truly are, one community. And they are united by a common culture. And dare I say, community always comes first for us. In Jordan, and we're trying to push it as well through our cooperation worldwide. Common values are celebrated while differences in beliefs are acknowledged and respected. The need to spread and promote culture of peace and acceptance of the other to raise awareness of the common values of respect, enrich the value of harmony and tolerance. Allah says in the Quran, chapter 16, verse 125, invite all to the way of thy Lord with wisdom and beautiful preaching, and argue with them in ways that are best and most gracious. As a Muslim, it is painful for me to see ignorant individuals desecrating the Quran and those beautiful words, and be allowed by some authorities to burning them under the pretext of freedom. Allow me to finish in this regard with a quote from Her Majesty Queen Noor, when she said, faith isn't just about who we are. We all have our different faiths. Faith isn't just about who we are, but what we do and how we do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Excellency. Very thoughtful words indeed. We'll continue with the proceedings now. I have the great privilege of inviting His Excellency Ambassador Federico Villegas, the permanent representative of the Republic of Argentina and past president of the Human Rights Council until very recently. It's quite an honor to have you here with us today, Excellency. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for the invitation and congratulations. I learned today that this is the 8th from my Jordan friend that we were together this morning, the 8th Interfaith Dialogue event, so very timely, I think. And let me share two sets of ideas. One set on the case of Argentina and this issue, and then another set of general ideas of why it's important an event like this at this time. In the case of Argentina, the interfaith dialogue is something that is part of our nature for different reasons. We are a country that we are one of the 4 countries that has received the highest amount of immigration in a certain period of time, in a short period of time. So in 20 years, we received almost half of our population as immigrants. We were 10 million, and 20 years after, we were 15 at the beginning of the 20th century. And those immigrants in the city of Buenos Aires, 3 out of 4 people in the street in 1910 did not speak Spanish. 75% of the population on the street did not speak Spanish. That's the amount of the impact of immigration. And of course, the immigrants came with their faith. So Argentina, the shaping of our identity is directly linked to the diversity of cultures, but also diversity of faith. So we are mostly Catholic, of course, but of course, Jews and Muslims and Protestants and Buddhists are also part of the ones that shape our identity. And in the public policy sphere, we have something that sometimes when I give my card as ambassador, people, look at the card because the whole faith from the public policy point of view is run under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So if you look at my card, I work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Trade, and Worship. And that's in the title of our ministry. So we have a national secretariat at the highest level who deals with worship. And worship totally linked, of course, of freedom of religion, interfaith dialogue, etc. So whenever we had a crisis, that we had many, unfortunately, one of the first things that happens is an interfaith dialogue on the situation itself, whether it's a social crisis, whether it's a natural crisis, and you get together all the main religions there. And it's the National Secretariat for Worship that, in a way, has the permanent dialogue within the Foreign Ministry, which is also a message of how linked to multilateralism and international affairs this is there. So that I wanted to share that part of Argentina and the diversity and the way that we use that secretariat to foster dialogue in different places of the country to promote interfaith dialogue, not only at the highest level, but also in the ground, grassroots organizations in the country. Then, if you allow me, I cannot avoid sharing some thoughts on what I heard before and the aid. I think that we have to be, in a way, conscious the importance of interfaith dialogue for multilateralism, for peace, but also we have to be conscious about the evolution of faith along history. Because the relationship of human beings with God and faith has been there since the beginning of human beings on earth. And different faiths and religions, the ones we have today, were born to gather common values at different times of history. But we have to be conscious that also religions of faith were the excuse for committing atrocities. And intolerance of not accepting other religions and faith were the cause of many, many wars of religion that provoked millions of people that died because of religion. So we evolved as humanity then, and we moved to the concept of tolerance. And if you look at 1948, we are about to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights this December, 75 years. And that declaration, which is the founding stone for the whole idea of international law of human rights, has 4 freedoms enshrined. Freedom of religion, for obvious reasons, because we all know what happened in the Second World War for the intolerance on a religion. So the same way that we are witnessing Islamophobia or Christianophobia. But that Universal Declaration has other 3 freedoms. And we have to always look at the declaration in a holistic way. And the other three are freedom of expression, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. So the freedom of religion has to be always looked upon in the context of the other freedom. And now we are going through another stage, which is go beyond the concept of tolerance of faith or religion and go to the respect for diversity of religions. Because the concept of tolerance itself has a negative connotation. You tolerate something that you don't like in principle. That's why you tolerate it. So one thing is to tolerate something I don't like. Another thing is to realize that the one that has a different faith and to respect and see the diversity of faith actually enriches me, make me a richer person to know the values and the faith of others, which is not the same thing as tolerating other people's religion. But, and with this I conclude, we have to accept that religions evolve. It is true, like it was said, human rights, the religious values are human values, but human rights and human values are not an abstract concept. It's a human being that shows and extends the values, and it's a group of human beings are the ones that put the values of a society. Therefore, today, we are witnessing an early warning that I think we should address in exercises like this to mix human rights, values, and religion as part of the dialogue and multilateralism. And sometimes, unfortunately, the lack of dialogue is in relation to some concepts on different ways of looking at human rights and linked to religion. In any religion, I'm not talking only one. This is a fact. I'm not saying nothing that diplomats here that are in the room with me in the Human Rights Council don't know. So I encourage events like this to address through interfaith dialogue and mutual understanding this idea of understanding each other, knowing our values, knowing what's behind our values. Because religions, like human beings, can evolve. My religion, Catholic, used to burn people alive, among other things, and gave certificates of whiteness to get a space in heaven. That was also Catholic. So my religion, and I speak for myself, evolved in a way. And the only way to evolve is to go back to the basic rights of a human being. And that's what I think this type of exercise at the end, since you mentioned, Alex, human rights, should be able to have a good open dialogue on human rights, values, and faith. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Excellency. Indeed, you have made us think deeply, and I appreciate very much your remarks. Now, I would like to have the pleasure of inviting His Excellency Ambassador Galif Israfilov, the permanent representative of the Republic of Azerbaijan. But before that, I must also, Excellency, express the appreciation of UNITAR and, if I may, of the co-organizers of this dialogue for being present from the very beginning. Your country is one of the member states that encourages us to do this thing, and here you are, 8 long years, but always with Azerbaijan in the midst. Thank you very much indeed. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mejia, and would like to thank the organizers, distinguished Ambassador of Jordan. Thank you for inviting me to contribute to this panel, and it's a pleasure to be here among eminent personalities today. I was suggested to speak on the topic of the faith and public policy, and I put away my hat of the chair of non-aligned movement for a second and would like to present you an experience of Azerbaijan, which we have cherished for generations in terms of the faith values, in terms of the interreligious dialogue and tolerance that we possess, a multinational, multi-ethnic society with major religions present on this very small piece of land, and how this diversity have enriched our society, our culture. So I probably will put a number of questions, but first of all would be what is the role of faith currently in a digitalized, in a globalized world, and how are we diplomats are building on the value of the religious values of the faith. We hear in the corridors sometimes that some argue that faith is an impediment to the development of economic development, sometimes to political development of democratic countries. And those forces are speaking in favor of more stronger and more deeper separation of state from religion. And there are arguments which they are articulating, especially in order to protect the rights and freedoms, to ensure equality of the citizens. I am on the side of those who believe that state governance cannot be pursued in isolation of the religious situation in the country without proper context of the religious values. And I believe, especially in matters relating to the interfaith harmony in multi-confessional society. So state and religion are interrelated. And since religious leaders and intercommunal relations influence on peace, on security, stability in the country, it is important that dialogue takes place. In Azerbaijan, for instance, for more than 70 years of the last century, there was only one religion, that was a communism. And we were not allowed to profess any other ideology. There were mosques, churches, synagogues, but they were only for conducting some day-to-day routine activities, but not for professing religious values. And when this system collapsed, when Soviet Union collapsed, immediately the vacuum appeared. And majority of Azerbaijani population who were Muslim, they were not well aware of the genuine values of Islam. And we had a big wave of foreign missionaries who were abusing this illiteracy, were trying to instigate other sentiments through the terms of religious values. So the government was seeking for the way to addressing the problem. And one of the best solution, I believe, that we found, we have sent young Muslim students, religious students, to the best schools of Islam in our neighborhood. And after several years, they returned and started to profess and sort of teach and preach the genuine practices of Islam, and they were providing religious sort of trainings for other representatives of other Islamic religions. And it helped us to avoid to most extent, to avoid the radicalization of the society and to maintain the interfaith dialogue and to maintain the diverse presence of many religions in Azerbaijan, because more than 90% are Muslims and of different congregations of Islam, Sunnis, Shias, and others. And nowadays we can see that all of them are professing their religious values in one mosque, or they're inviting neighboring Jews in from synagogues to establish relations with them, or other Christians neighbors from their churches to at least to upgrade, to provide them a knowledge about the situation of religious communities, and at least to keep at the policy level and at the level of discussions, interfaith harmony. And that is one of the best examples, I believe, in our country, that we managed to avoid the clash of the religions and prevent the radicalization of society. The other issue is I wanted to raise is how we can help build a public discourse on what constitutes the genuine system of values and morality in a society, and what public policy goals and what mechanisms shall we employ to preserve and enrich a system of values in a multicultural and a multi-confessional society. So to find the proper answer to that questions, one need to examine how religious beliefs and practices within and among religious confessions are professed in a society, and how they contribute to the formation of individual perceptions of morals, individual perception of the value system of value. And in democratic societies, especially in societies with a transition from one system of governance to the other, this cannot develop without public debate and initiations of specific regulations and laws on the role of the religious values, which have contributed to the formation of a national identity, of traditions peculiar to every nation. So these values for generations contributed to elaboration and perfection of democratic thinking and standards. In the 12th century, in Azerbaijan, one of the famous poets, Nizami Ganjavi, was speaking about the equality of men and women. And he was one of the major philosophers of our age. And based on that idea of equality of women and men, back in the end of the 19th century, Azerbaijani society have embraced for the first time in the Muslim East, the equal rights of women. So we have introduced, based on the traditional approaches to the rights of women at the legal, on the legal ground, we have introduced into the constitution in 1819 the women's suffrage. They could have they were allowed to vote well ahead of many European nations, have even Switzerland, if we take, for instance. And therefore, I believe that the faith and public policy, they should build on contribution of the system of values that religions and cultures and traditions have contributed to the formation of the nation. So I will limit myself to these 2 points. Maybe they are more philosophical rather than practical in terms of the topics that you have discussed, suggested for discussion. And I thank you, Mr. Mejia.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you very much indeed. You will have noted, dear participants, and all of you present here in Geneva, what we wanted to do indeed is to get to hear the opinions, but also, very important, this is my point, the best practices, the reality on the ground. What is it that has happened or happens from the perspective of each one of the persons speaking, or the governments or institutions they represent. This is an excellent example, and I thank you, Ambassador, because indeed I do know your country rather well, and I respect it because of that, of those facts that you mentioned, and the inclusivity of it, and the respect for faiths. So before we conclude this second panel, it will be important if we have the video from Ambassador Jackson ready. Use even the one that we had before. We have the representative of the United Nations Christian Association, Ambassador Rhoda Jackson, who was ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva a few years back, and now is the Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Bahamas, if I may, and also in a successful career before ambassador to Switzerland, to Belgium, to the European Union, and to the United Nations in New York. So a distinguished diplomatic career, but also at the same time, a person that when she was in Geneva, this is important to share, many diplomats, not only staff members as myself, are members of the United Nations Christian Association. This organization was created and is one of the co-conveners of this dialogue from the very first one. Actually, the original idea came from the United Nations Christian Association to go and ask Jordan to join forces with us with UNITAR. So as one of the founders of this dialogue, it's been very positive for us, staff members of the United Nations under this umbrella, to see that many diplomats also have joined the United Nations Christian Association. In that sense, it gives me great pleasure to give Ambassador Jackson, now in Nassau, the floor with this video. Thank you.
His Excellency Walid Khalid Obedat, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan to the United Nations in Geneva, Mr. Nikhil Seth, UN Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director of UNITAR, Excellencies, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am once again honored to participate in this, the 8th Interfaith Dialogue, as a representative of the United Nations Christian Association, and I extend my sincere appreciation to His Excellency Ambassador Obedat of the Permanent Mission of Jordan, and to Mr. Nikhil Seth for the invitation to once again engage with this distinguished panelist on this important subject. I applaud the commitment and the dedication of the Permanent Mission of Jordan and the United Nations Institute for Training and Research to bring together representatives of different backgrounds and faiths to exchange views on issues that impact the lives of the peoples whom we represent. As chair of the United Nations Christian Association, the approach to the discussion on faith and multilateralism will be considered from the Bible-based description of faith in God, which comes as a result of belief in the Lord Jesus Christ. This is a fundamental tenet of the United Nations Christian Association. Allow me to briefly inform you of UNCA. It's a non-profit organization designed to raise awareness of faith and provide an environment for dialogue. UNCA is committed to prayer and fellowship, and through its monthly meetings, virtually and in person, Christian staff members of the United Nations and any international organization and diplomats from various permanent missions come together for prayer. UNCA has as a primary objective that of glorifying God in all of its activities and it seeks to tell others of the good news of God's love for mankind through Jesus Christ, who gave his life for us. With this background, we turn today to our attention to the meaning of faith. In today's world, faith is described as many different things to different people. Faith is defined as a system of beliefs or a belief in God, in doctrines, in teachings of religion. From the Christian viewpoint, faith is believing in a holy God and putting trust in what he says and does. Hebrews 11:1 states that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. Through faith, we understand that the world was formed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. Faith, then, is not necessarily experienced by what we see with the natural eye, but it's seeing that which is unseen. Multilateralism is viewed as the coordination of ideologies, causes, programs, or activities among groups or country, or more than three. Multilateralism remains the raison d'etre of the United Nations, as its members collaborate on addressing common threats. It extends itself beyond countries to entities or organizations and provides a platform of deliberation, negotiations, and in many cases, identifies concrete solutions aimed at bringing about a more effective common good. Multilateralism then takes into consideration the involvement of many stakeholders through combined effort, with a view to addressing the myriad adversities faced today. The apparent shift away from the bilateralism, where the interests of the more dominant takes precedent over the hardships of the less predominant, has created a space for multilateralism, where a shared approach is taken to strategically address global issues. International cooperation, therefore, is even more imperative today, as we, through combined efforts, combat global challenges confronting us. The COVID pandemic is a compelling example which brought to the fore the reality of greater inequality and served to underscore that when what affects one affects all, and reinforce the need for continued collective will to find sustainable solutions to collective challenges. The adverse effects of climate change, though initiated in the developed industrialized countries, continue to have a crippling impact on smaller countries far removed. These countries suffer threats such as increased frequency and intensity of hurricanes and typhoons, or sea level rise due to unbridled emission of greenhouse gases. They are forced to bear the burden of loss of life, economic hardship, and long-term environmental devastation. The existential threat of climate change is a constant reality for many countries. Multilateralism then plays a critical role in addressing these concerns. How then does this faith impact what we do in a world that is interdependent? Faith is the integral component which motivates human beings to action. Faith gives impetus to thought, which leads to influential self-expression and initiates action on challenges faced globally and within the confines of individual nations. Faith motivates and provides a sense of hope despite the disparities which exist among nations. A multilateral approach to poverty demands the resources of those who possess more than enough to collectively address the prevailing abject social and economic inequities. The interconnectedness of nations requires a collective response to ongoing threats, ranging from civil unrest and violence.
That's what we were saying before. The concluding thoughts were caught, but still out of appreciation for Ambassador Jackson that has taken the time to do this thing from the Bahamas. And we wanted to show you the video, but with the proper apologies because the last minute, I think, is not there. I think we got the message. Now, this concludes indeed the second panel, quite interesting and profound, I believe. And then we will proceed immediately to the concluding remarks. The concluding remarks should be presented by the chairman of the Board of Trustees of UNITAR, Ambassador Luis Gallegos, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of his country. He's in his capital in Quito. But before that, my team found a slide, if you can put it on the screen, and Excellency, before I give you the floor, a slide with a phrase some of you know from Dag Hammarskjöld. This phrase captures for me the essence of real politics when you are at the UN, and is this thought that you see on the screen, that the UN wasn't created to take mankind into heaven or into paradise, but rather to save humanity from hell. It's a little extreme, it is decades ago, but this man at the center of the hurricane, a man that died on duty, flying over Africa when his demise came, flying to a peace negotiation, indeed knew what the UN was. So to the late Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, our appreciation for his legacy that lives today. And with that, and without further ado, I would like to offer the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Luis Gallegos, the Chairman of the Board of Trustees of UNITAR. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alex. First of all, I would like to thank the permanent representative. Thank you very much, Alex. I would like to thank the permanent representative of Jordan, my good friend, Ambassador Walid Khalid Al-Baydat, from the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and the executive director of UNITAR, Nikhil Seth, for the opportunity of participating in this 8th Interfaith Dialogue. It is a very proper moment. I would like to also greet the excellence, my colleagues, the excellencies, panelists, and friends. I would like to congratulate the speakers and the panelists for profound reflections at this moment. The panels on faith and multilateral and faith and public policy are very timely in a world with great challenges. As the Secretary General has stated in his speech in Davos, as you mentioned a few weeks ago, there is a health crisis, a humanitarian crisis that we are meeting because of the pandemic. There is a crisis in the economy of the world that has a profound relation to the inequity, which is the reality of many of the countries which we represent, and a crisis in the climate sphere, which many of the panelists have related. But we also have spoken about human rights, and we also have spoken about the need to protect the human rights of persons and from the most vulnerable groups. Women, children, persons with disabilities, and those who are aging require our major effort from us to protect their rights. The challenges of the fragmentation of multilateralism were expressed by the Secretary General, and we must all meet the possibility of looking for the existence of a culture of peace, a culture of understanding and dialogue, as mechanisms to look forward to have the possibility of consensus, of agreements between us that will meet these challenges for the population of the world. Peace, respect, dialogue are amongst the issues that religions brings to the forefront. So therefore, religion and faith are intimately intertwined with the efforts we make on behalf of those populations. I would like to end these concluding remarks by saying that everything the panelists and the speakers in the inauguration have said are fully issues that we must have on the roster of the multilateral system, that we must recapture a vision of peace, an understanding, a dialogue, and consensus building. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Excellency, indeed. And thank you for taking the time to connect with us from thousands of kilometers away. Now, I want to conclude this 8th Geneva Interfaith Dialogue, not before thanking again His Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Jordan, for making this possible. And especially, I mean what I'm going to say, dear friends and dear colleagues, because of his leadership ambition this happens because of that commitment to dialogue that characterizes you, Excellency. So with that, I kindly ask you to take the gavel and to close us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Finish. Thank you. Some Excellencies, can we have a photo?
Yes.
Last photo. Yes, of course.
الله يبارك فيك. شكرا موضوع. الله يبارك فيك. شكرا لك. شكرا.
Iman, can you put the banners?